Welcome back to this episode of the Mayoral Podcast, everyone. I'm your host, Matt Mayer. Before I get into today's episode, make sure that you hit the like button, subscribe, and if you like what you see here today, make sure you share with friends and family. I will also leave time codes in the description below, so if there's anything you specifically want to see me talk about, please make sure to jump ahead and do so. Now, I have a lot of topics that I want to cover today. Going to try to keep each one kind of short and sweet. So, bear with me. The first thing I'm going to go over is the looming economic collapse that some people are claiming is not going to happen. Others are claiming that it is going to happen. I believe we are about to approach that. This economy has seemingly been put together with bubblegum and duct tape. It was essentially MacGyvered together for the last year and a half, 2 years. And I think we're going to start feeling that. So this first article here, this is from Financial Times. It just says, U.S. stocks fall after weaker than expected jobs data and Apple earnings. The non-farm payrolls report released on Friday showed the U.S. economy added 187,000 jobs in July, fewer than the 200,000 forecast of economists polled by Reuters. So that's just one sign. The jobs market, that was something that the Fed has been talking about for a while, that market has to cool down. We haven't seen unemployment reach where they believed it was going to reach. I still believe that that's going to happen. I think most people kind of believe that's going to happen. On top of that, the U.S. debt rating was, shocker, lowered from a AAA rating to a AA plus by Fitch last week. The Biden administration naturally wrote it off and said that there's no reason for concern. Frankly, I don't know how we've had a AAA credit rating for as long as we've had. This isn't necessarily just on Biden. This is on every presidential administration for the last 20 plus years. The amount of spending that we have, the deficit in the budget, we just go deeper and deeper in debt. It doesn't really make any sense how this is actually staying at a AAA rating for as long as it did. But again, just another sign that we're headed for kind of a little bit harder time. So from this article, NPR, but on Tuesday, Fitch Ratings cut the U.S. debt by one notch from a AAA to AA plus, partly in response to how the federal government handled the debt crisis 2 months ago. That move mirrored a similar downgrade by S&P in 2011 following the U.S. debt ceiling standoff in Congress. Fitch cited alarm over the country's deteriorating finances and expressed major doubts about the government's ability to tackle the growing debt burden because of the sharp political divisions, exemplified by the brinkmanship over the debt ceiling that brought the government close to a disastrous default. Article continues on, just talking more about how it lost its AAA rating, what the impact is. This being NPR is naturally going to say that they don't think it's that big of an issue. However, this is something that is going to flow downhill. During the pandemic and the subsequent year afterwards, there was a supply chain crunch, and that was part of what everyone had attributed to some of the inflation, that it was going to cost, freight was costing more, gas was costing more, things of that nature. So it was naturally going to lead to an increase in product prices. However, one of the biggest trucking companies out there, Yellow Corporation, decided to file for bankruptcy due to insolvency issues. And this is something that we're really going to feel down the road. I can't imagine that a trucking company of this size, when we finally seemingly got the supply chain crunch under control, a collapse of this size, to me, seems like we're just going to see another supply chain crunch. So even though we may have gotten inflation down due to the fact that we've actually reduced the issue with the supply chains, and we've kind of tampered down spending due to the interest rate rises, this is only going to potentially perpetuate everything to extend even longer, and that's just not good overall for the economy. So from CNN Business, Yellow Corp, a once dominant U.S. trucking company, has filed for bankruptcy as it winds down its 99-year business that employs 30,000 workers. The Nashville-based logistics provider announced Sunday it had filed for Chapter 11 relief in the U.S. Bankruptcy Court for the District of Delaware. And it just continues on, just talking about all, like, breaking down their troubles, where they've kind of seen issues. Again, we just got over the supply chain issues, and a big company like this going down is only going to potentially exacerbate things to be not exactly right back where we were at, but it's certainly not going to help. And all that kind of leads into where we're at with regards to fuel. Now, this time last year, we were near record highs. the Biden administration decided to tap the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which resulted in a relief at the pump. Now, since then, they've only continued. This is directly from the U.S. Energy Information Administration website, and it's a simple chart here. You could see the U.S. you could see the weekly U.S. ending stock of crude oil in the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, and this is dating back all the way from the early 1980s. And you can see there's a huge drop-off near the end of this chart, and that's when they started tapping into the petroleum reserve, and it's only been going down since then. We're at lows that we haven't seen since the 1980s with regards to the amount that we have on hand, and I can only imagine it's going to continue to go lower as the economy continues to potentially be on the brink of a recession, whatever you want to call it. The Biden administration continues to tap into the oil reserve, causing long-term pain for what's going to eventually happen. We eventually have to replace that. The estimates it's going to take years and years and years just to get back up to the same levels that we were prior to the Biden administration burning through millions of barrels of oil. So again, this is something that's being propped up right now. The cost of fuel is artificially being deflated by the use of the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, but as we saw just the other day, there was a joint military exercise between China and Russia just off the shores of Alaska, and really to kind of demonstrate their potential power together. And that's really not something that anyone wants to see, especially here in the United States. We're tapping our Strategic Petroleum Reserve. This is it's supposed to be for emergency uses, not to artificially inflate the economy. And that's essentially what the Biden administration has been doing for the last year, almost year and a half now. Everyone should be concerned with the potential escalation that's been looming for the last year and a half now between China and Taiwan. Something like that would put the U.S. in potentially a position where they have to step in. Having a lower petroleum reserve does not bode well for those situations of war. All that leads to central banks and the World Economic Forum, places like that are trying to take control and centralize government and have complete control over the citizens of the world. That leads to the clip that I'm going to play here. It's from 2020, but it still rings true of what they're trying to do with the centralization of currencies. And this is Augustine Carson. He is the general manager for the Bank of International Settlements, what he had to say about CBDCs.
For example, in cash, we don't know, for example, who's using a $100 bill today. We don't know who is using a 1,000 peso bill today. A key difference with the CBDC is that central bank will have absolute control on the rules and regulations that will determine the use of that expression of central bank liability. And also, we will have the technology to enforce that. Those two issues are extremely important.
There you go. We heard it directly from the horse's mouth. Them talking about getting rid of cash and having a central bank digital currency so they can have control over the transactions. They know what you're buying. They can potentially prevent you from buying something they don't want you to buy. Now, some people might say, oh, that's a great idea. We could prevent all types of crime. Well, just remember what happened a couple of months back, the beginning of last year, and the Canadian trucker protest, when the Canadian government locked people out of their accounts. Now, they had to go to the banks to get them to be blocked out of their accounts, but they did it nonetheless. That is something that should be very scary for everyone. Now, these people were just protesting the vaccine mandate in Canada and not doing anything illegal. However, the Canadian government decided that it made sense for them to shut these people down by blocking their access to their accounts. So anything against the government in this case was going to be something they felt was worthy of locking people out of society, essentially. And that's what this guy is saying. They have total control over who buys what, and if you buy something they don't like or for a cause that they don't like, they can completely shut you out of the system. If you don't think it's happening all over the worth right now. I've got a couple of clips showing you exactly what they're doing in some of these countries. Check it out.
Australia is slowly shifting towards being cash-free. More than $1 billion worth of notes have disappeared from circulation in the past 12 months. It follows the Commonwealth Bank's decision to start trialling cashless branches across Sydney. Economists say a cashless society will hurt criminals on the black market. but will make life more difficult for the elderly who rely on notes and coins.
When Elias Brotberger goes to work, he doesn't need ID, and he doesn't need money. In fact, much of what he needs to get through the day is hidden right there, just below the surface, in his hand.
You like to touch it?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Oh, weird. Yeah, it's like a grain of rice.
Yeah, a grain of rice.
Embedded in his hand is a microchip that serves as his keys, his ID, and his wallet.
Yeah, it's all in chip, so I use it like to get around the building.
Buy snacks.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's buy some snacks.
Exactly.
So I can't open it.
No.
Okay.
So what I need to do is I need to first blip my chip, and it will log me in, and from there I get access to the fridge.
There you go. There's the proof showing countries all over the world trying to reduce the amount of cash that they have for society and force a CBDC. Now, people might conflate CBDC with cryptocurrency. Those two things couldn't be further from the same. Now, they do operate on similar technologies. However, when it comes to cryptocurrency, it's completely decentralized, whereas a CBDC, in its name itself, it's a central bank digital currency. That is something completely controlled by the government. Now, they can say, you can have this, you can have that, you cannot have that. Whatever they want to say, whatever fits their narrative, they can block you or block you from buying one thing or encourage you from buying another thing if it's something that goes along with what their narrative is. Now, when it comes to crypto, when I used the example of the Canadian truckers last January rather, these guys used crypto to actually access funds. People in the Canadian government were actually trying to actively shut down these crypto transactions and trying to access these people's wallets. And one of the companies, I can't remember the name of the company off the top of my head, but one of the companies that produced these wallets said, hey, there's nothing we can do. The product that we sell is completely unhackable. It's something that we cannot access. That's the point of the product, is to keep you from potentially hijacking these people's money. That's the huge difference between crypto and CBDC. Don't let anyone tell you that they're the same thing just because they're technology based. They couldn't be further from the same. Meanwhile, I talked about a couple of episodes ago how cancel culture was coming from Jason Aldean, gave him the big middle finger, and I just want to highlight the difference of the way that the media is covering Jason Aldean and implying that his lyrics and what he was doing there is racist versus what's happening in South Africa and the leader there, Julius Malema, singing the song Kill the Boer, which Boer refers to Dutch settlers from back in like the 17 or 1600s, whatever it was, and the way that the New York Times covers that versus the way that they covered the Jason Aldean story. And then I'll play a clip of this guy actually saying, yes, I am calling for killing. So here it is, New York Times, Kill the Boer song fuels backlash in South Africa and the United States. Kill the Boer, Julius Malema chanted, referring to white farmers. The crowd in the stadium in Johannesburg on Saturday roared back in approval. A video clip of that moment shot across the internet and was seized upon the Americans on the far right. Of course, the far right, the people on the far right, Kill the Boer, which again is referring to white people, white settlers, is only resonating with people on the far right, according to the New York Times. Continuing on. The notion really took off when Elon Musk, the South African-born billionaire who left the country as a teenager, chimed in. They're openly pushing for genocide of white people in South Africa, Mr. Musk wrote. In recent years, people on the right in South Africa and the United States, including former President Donald J. Trump, have seized on attacks on white farmers to make the false claim that there have been mass killings. Despite the words in the song, now this is where it gets ridiculous, so bear with me here. Despite the words in the song, they should not be taken as a literal call to violence, according to Mr. Malema and veterans and historians of the anti-apartheid struggle. So this is saying, don't listen to the words. It's just hyperbole. Like, nothing to see here. We're not actually calling for this. However, and New York Times defending this. Obviously, the New York Times is going to defend this. But however, you see the way that they treated the Jason Aldean, and this article is from Billboard.com. It says, Jason Aldean continues to take heat over Try That in a Small Town, a track some have deemed pro-gun, pro-violence, and modern-day lynching song. So just pretty ridiculous. CNN obviously is going to have one of the more left-wing state representatives out there they can find. If you remember from the Tennessee, the Nashville mass shooting, the people that the Tennessee Three, as they call them, this is one of those guys that was a Tennessee Three, took full advantage of trying to gain notoriety. And this is one of those people. So CNN, Caitlin Collins spoke with Tennessee State Rep Justin Jones. As a Tennessee lawmaker, as a young black lawmaker in our state, I feel like we had an obligation and duty to condemn this heinous, vile, racist song that is really about hearkening back to the days past. Jones, 27. The lawmaker said in his mind it was no accident. The video was filmed at the Murray County Courthouse, where the race riots happened and where, as well as the 1927 lynching of a young man who was 18 years old. Jones says he sees the song as an attempt to normalize racist violence, vigilantism, and white nationalism, while glorifying a vision of the South that he said the state is trying to move forward from. So, again, the Jason Aldean song, read the lyrics yourself, makes no mention of race, anything like that. But it's obviously going to be deemed as racist by the people on the left. However, the South African president, Julius Malema, is calling for, in a chant, kill the Boer. And that has nothing to do with it. They kind of sweep that under the rug. That is just, it's an old saying. It doesn't actually mean that. Well, Julius Malema himself called for killing and saying that's part of a revolution. You don't believe it? Check it out. Here's the clip of him saying exactly that.
You'll not be scared. What do you intend on doing?
I'm not scared of death. I'm not scared of death. I don't know why I'm still alive.
Are you scared of killing?
I died long time ago.
Are you scared of killing?
I'm not scared of killing. A revolutionary is a walking killing machine. Not scared of death. If that need arise, I will kill. And I will do so with no hesitation, especially in defense of my people.
You must never be scared to kill. A revolution demands that at some point there must be killing, because the killing is part of a revolutionary act.
There you have it again, straight from the horse's mouth. There's really no other way to take that. He's calling for killing. He says that's part of an uprising, that's part of a revolution, and yet these people are not saying that his chant is calling for killing, even though it says kill the Boer. You really can't make this stuff up. It's almost as if some of the stuff that's happening in today's world is something that would be rejected if you were to try to pitch this as a film to somebody in Hollywood, because it's just so unbelievable that it wouldn't make for a good film. Yet somehow it's happening here today. There's the U.S. women's soccer team who has never lost in the round of 16 that just managed to lose in the round of 16. Now, if you're like me, I don't care about women's sports. I don't find them very interesting. If I'm going to take time out of my day to watch somebody play a sport, I'm going to watch the best in the world. That's how I've always explained it to people that have asked me, why don't I watch college football? Well, I don't watch college football because they aren't the best in the world. They might be better than me. They might be better than most people in the world. However, they are not better than the people in the NFL. And most people that are on that field will never play in the NFL. So therefore, if I'm going to take 3 hours out of my day, 4 hours out of my day, if I'm going to watch a whole day of football, I'm not watching football on Saturday. I'm watching football on Sunday. I'm going to watch the best in the world. But that said, they managed to lose for the first time ever in the round of 16. And they asked Megan Rapinoe, who is a far left activist, what her favorite thing or her favorite memory of being in the sport was, because she's retired. She was retiring after this tournament, and she said equal pay. Now, there's been conversations from people all over the political spectrum about equal pay, especially when it comes to sports. That's something that's more prominent because it gets more attention. So there's a chart here from CNN showing the pay disparity between men and women when it comes to the World Cup. So this is the men's World Cup is in purple, the women's World Cup is in yellowish orange, whatever color that is. And you see that there's a huge pay gap between the two, which, okay, if they're producing the same product, then that's fine. Now, I liken that to me, okay? I might work on an episode of this podcast for as long as somebody like Joe Rogan works on an episode for his podcast. Maybe, maybe not, probably not. Joe puts a lot of time into it. Obviously, his interviews are sometimes 3.5 hours long. But let's just say that I did. I have few dozen views on my videos between Rumble and YouTube combined on every one of my videos. Should I get paid the same as Joe Rogan? No, because I need to put asses in the seats and eyeballs on the screen, and they're just not doing that. So one of the big things, or one of the big kind of rebukes of this, was that Will Cain was on ESPN. This was a number of years ago, talking about the disparity in the amount of revenue that they bring in. And afterwards, after he was on ESPN talking about it, it was quote unquote debunked. So I'm going to go to that article, or there's several different articles out there, but this is from Yahoo. This is from 2019. The most popular set of numbers used to make this claim came from a Forbes report that alleged Women's World Cup generated $131 million in revenue, while the Men's World Cup generated $6 billion. What the Wall Street Journal found out on Tuesday, however, were those numbers were false. The $131 million figure was actually the expenses for the Women's World Cup, not revenue. Forbes assistant managing editor Mike Ozarian read the chart wrong and then told his readers bluntly the pay disparity is justified. He has since removed his erroneous article, but the misinformation has still spread far and wide. So this is saying that those numbers are false. It's not $6 billion in revenue for the men and $131 billion for the women, or $131 million rather for the women. That it's actually much different. So if you read on in this article, it says, when FIFA claims it made $5.4 billion in revenue from the 2018 World Cup, FIFA is assuming that broadcasters and sponsors are paying primarily for the men's tournament, not the women's one or the youth's one. Whether the assumption is true or not apparently doesn't matter to FIFA, according to Tijana Hanini, who worked at FIFA for 19 years. That's something we never analyze, Hanini said in March. What is the potential value of the Women's World Cup? Nobody knows the Women's World Cup commercial value because it's not sold separate. This is something that should at least be discussed. So, first of all, if you're like me, I don't believe that. I think that's garbage. I think that there's absolutely a way for them to delineate between the men's and the women's revenues. However, they're choosing not to do so. So here's where I want to completely debunk this nonsense of the women make much more and there's a huge pay disparity and they need to get paid more. If they put eyeballs on the screen and asses in the seats, then they deserve to get paid more. However, I don't believe they do, and here's why. If you use those numbers, that $6 billion revenue, and then you take the $131 million revenue that they were estimating for in the initial article, that makes a 46-1. That means there would be 46 for every $1 the Women's World Cup brings in. The Men's World Cup brings in $46. Now, the only way, if they're saying that there's no way to delineate, which again, I think is bullshit, I think they absolutely can tell the difference between the two. They just don't want people to know because then the pay gap would be justified. But looking at the Women's Super League Club, this is from 2021-2022, the clubs generated £32 million in aggregate revenue, which is up 60%, so good for them. They've generated a huge jump. Now go to the Premier League, okay? The Premier League in 2021-2022, £5.5 billion. The difference there is 172 to 1. So for every $1 the women's bring in, the men bring in 172. Let's look at closer to home. The NBA versus the WNBA. The revenue for the NBA, $10 billion. WNBA, $60 million. That's 167 to 1. So those two numbers are pretty close to each other. 172 to 1, 167 to 1. The FIFA revenue, if you were to take that 131, which they're saying is expenses, but if you were to compare that number to the $6 billion, that's only 42 to 1. So they'd be lucky if it was 42 to 1. These two examples I'm drawing are almost 107. The average amount is 170 to 1 in terms of revenue. So there's really nothing for them to even, if they could point to something, then make the case for that. But I took the biggest women's sports league in the United States, and I don't know if the NBA or the NFL is the biggest men's sports league, but I compared the two, and the revenue is 167 to 1. And then you look at the women's elite league or whatever they're calling it in the men's Premier League, and that's 172 to 1. I don't believe, I believe those numbers are wrong. That's 6 billion to 131 million, but they're wrong not in the way that they want them to be. They're wrong in the other direction, that showing that the women are probably way overpaid. Could be wrong, but break out the numbers. Let me see them. So we go from the completely absurd to the astronomically absurd here. Neil Degrasse Tyson, one of the best astrophysicists in the world, I guess. I don't know if he still is. At least he was at some point. He's dedicated seemingly the last couple of years of his life to promote transgenderism and make things up because he's extremely brilliant and can talk through these things scientifically and make it seem like he's right. However, he almost makes the exact opposite case for what he's claiming when it comes to gender identity and where people are on the spectrum, all this other crazy stuff. So I'll get to his most recent rant, but I think in talking about the pay disparities between the men and the women, I think it's apropos to go back to his conversation that he had with Ben Shapiro on the Sunday special. I don't know if this is beginning of this year, last year, whatever it was. And he's talking about how in the future, everything should be potentially gauged on a spectrum based on hormonal levels. It's an absolutely absurd assertion, but here's him talking about it, and I'm going to totally destroy his argument when we get back.
We know that hormones manifest differently in different people, and just the whole thing with steroids. Steroids are hormones, right? And we rallied against steroids in professional sports because it gives you an undue advantage. So I've tried to think of what the future of sports would be in the world of a gender spectrum. And it may be, you don't specify whether it's a male or female sport. You just take measurements of what your hormonal balances are. And so you compete based on your hormonal. I mean, this is thought I had. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where it's going to land.
The WNBA won't be in business for very long if that's the case.
It would just be, you'd have to find some way to compete people against each other if you still care that sports is an interesting activity.
So there you have him talking about the future of sports being on some type of gender spectrum or some type of hormonal spectrum where we gauge people's testosterone levels versus others, and then we place them in these certain leagues. Well, one of the biggest problem with that is it totally eliminates women from these competitive sports. I look no further than Serena Williams. You can go and check out, there's a clip of her out there talking about how she would stand no chance against the top men in the world. However, there is an actual real world example of her losing to the 200th ranked tennis player back in the late 90s. So this article here, talking about the battle of the sexes between Venus and Serena and the world's number 203, Karsten Brash. I don't know about you guys, but I can't remember the last time I heard anything about Karsten Brash. So I'm going to read this article, and then we're going to ask a question and see what the answer to that is. So Venus and Serena took on the world number 203, Karsten Brash, in the 1998 Australian Open in an exhibition named the Battle of the Sexes. The event came about after Americans allegedly claimed that they could beat any male player ranked outside of the top 200. Brash volunteered to compete against them after overhearing the conversation. Brash took on Serena Williams first in a single-set contest. He raced a 5-0 lead, allowing the former world number one to only claim a single game before securing a 6-1 win. Venus Williams put on a better showing, even managing to break the German serve. However, Brash still managed to claim a 6-2 victory over the 7-time Grand Slam champion. So, ask yourself this question. Would the world be better off without Serena and Venus Williams? Because if this was a gender spectrum, where would they be placed? Do you think people are going to be watching the 200th, 400th ranked people in the world, and it's all different? It's all different genders, and sometimes it's a man, woman, sometimes it's a woman, winning. Like, Serena Williams seems like a genuinely decent person. You want to erase her from the record books? You think she has 23 Grand Slam victories if she's playing against men? Clearly, she couldn't beat this guy, who no one has ever heard of, ever. The number 203 guy back in 1998. She would have no chance against the absolute best. I mean, this guy's outside of the top 200. She knows she couldn't beat him. And you're saying that it would be better if we just had everyone on a spectrum. So she would be in the 5th or 6th league, whatever league. Maybe she'd be dominating, maybe she wouldn't. But who's going to be watching that 5th or 6th league? No one's going to be watching that. What little girl's going to look up to and say, oh, I could be like Serena Williams or Venus Williams, and they've never even heard of it. It's like, what league is this? Nobody cares about that league. In the world, and this is your vision. This is your future vision of sports. It's absolutely absurd. And that brings us to his latest rant. He goes on and he's just doubling down on the nonsense. Here's Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about more of the same nonsense.
My point is, apparently, the XXXY chromosomes are insufficient. Because when we wake up in the morning, we exaggerate whatever feature we want to portray the gender of our choice. Either the one you're assigned, the one you choose to be, whatever it is. And so now, so now just to tie a bow on this, I say to you, somewhere I think I read that the United States was a land where we have the pursuit of happiness.
Yes.
Suppose no matter my chromosomes, today I feel 80% female, 20% male. I'm gonna put on makeup. I'm gonna do that. Tomorrow I might feel 80% male. I'll remove the makeup and I'll wear a muscle shirt. Why do you care?
Yeah.
What business is it of yours to require that I fulfill your inability to think of gender on a spectrum?
I mean, for a once well-respected scientist, I don't know why this guy has fallen to such ridiculous lows, saying things that are obviously not true. And even, I'm kind of disappointed in Stephen A. Smith for not pushing back harder on him. And maybe he did later in the episode or something like that, but still, I mean, that's just absolute nonsense. Again, this is ultimately going to remove women from sports. So for those of you who don't know who DK Metcalf is, he's a receiver for the Seattle Seahawks. It says here on the headline, and he's an absolute freak of nature. The guy's got like 2% body fat. He's one of the fastest guys in the NFL, and this is a league of extremely fast, strong men, and he stands out as one of the fastest guys. So after the season, he decided he wanted to do a little bit of training and try his hand in the 100-meter dash. So it says here in the 100-meter dash, he does a 10.36 seconds. So let's put that kind of into perspective and read just this one paragraph here. It says, Seattle Seahawks wide receiver DK Metcalf ran the 100-meter dash in 10.36 seconds at the USATF Golden Games and Distance Open in Walnut, California on Sunday, finishing in 9th in his heat. So there was a heat of 9 people. There was 2 different heats, one of 8, one of 9. He finished 9 out of 9 in that one. His time was 3rd slowest out of 17 entrants, making him 15th out of 17. There's 2 different heats into this particular race, one of 8, one of 9. In his heat, he came in 9th. So an unbelievably fast 10.36. However, not even good enough to register as a realistic competitor for either one of those 2 races. Now, that said, the qualifying time for the Olympics for men is 10.05. So you need to run a 10.05 just to even qualify for the Olympics. So DK Metcalf was quite a ways off with his 10.36 to even qualify for the Olympics. The reason I bring that up is because you look at the women's all-time record for 100-meter dash, and the best time is 10.49 seconds. Second best, 10.54 seconds, which means in the history of women's racing, they wouldn't be anywhere close to the 10.05 to even qualify for the Olympics. So in Neil deGrasse Tyson's world of putting gender on a spectrum, how many different spectrums are you going to have until you have a competition with women actually competing at the 100-meter dash at the Olympics? The Olympics is supposed to be the best athletes from around the world. If you don't break it into male and female and you do this stupid gender spectrum, this hormonal spectrum, or whatever this idiot's calling it, you're going to completely eliminate the women. How far would you have to go down to get even Florence Griffith Joyner to even appear in one of the races. Because DK Metcalf ran a 10.36 and he was nowhere. He was 15 out of 17 total people, 9 out of 9 in his particular race. There's no way that any woman would be anywhere close to the stage. They would be nowhere close to even qualifying. How many women down the line do you have to get until you say, okay, well, this amount of hormonal level would be where a woman can now compete? You'd be at the, I don't know, somewhere in the 1,000th best sprinter in the world. Is that someone who's going to appear in the Olympics? I don't think so, because the top 1,000 are going to all be male. So you're just going to have one race, and there's not going to be a female race. Now ask yourself again, Neil, is this something that's better for women or worse for women? Not having that role model to look up to, like a Serena Williams saying, I could be Serena Williams. No one's going to know Serena Williams. What was the name of the guy that she lost to? I don't even know. Some German guy, last name Brash. No one's ever heard of the guy. No one's ever heard of that guy. No one's going to look up to, no one looks up and says, this is the guy that I want to be, outside of maybe people in his hometown. Like, that's it. It's like, oh, this guy, he was, on the World Tennis Tour. Like, he was number 200. Like, that's pretty cool. Like, he's from my hometown. But all over the world, people are saying, I want to be Novak Djokovic. I want to be Rafa Nadal. All over the world, people are saying, I want to be Venus Williams. I want to be Serena Williams. You're going to eliminate them completely from the record books. You're going to take them out completely and say the world would be better off without these two. Essentially, that's what you're saying, Neil. On to the hero of the day, the hero of the week, maybe the hero of the month when it comes to the culture wars, and that's the R&B singer Neo. This guy initially was on a podcast saying that he doesn't believe that boys should become girls. He came back and there was a statement that he put out on Twitter retracting that statement, and then he came back out, made a video, put it out on TikTok saying that he did not put that statement out and he doesn't apologize for his stance. We need more people like that. The more you see somebody like that, somebody in the hip hop, R&B, in professional sports, things like that, Hollywood, standing up to these clowns on the left saying that boys can become girls and girls can become boys. I mean, we just played a couple of clips of Neil Degrasse Tyson, one of the smartest men in the world, claiming the nonsense. We need more people on this side of the culture war. So I'm going to play the first clip of him talking about his stance on transgenderism and why he doesn't believe that children should be making these decisions.
If your little boy comes to you and says, Daddy, I want to be a girl, and you just let him rock with that, you just let him.
Right.
He's 5.
Right. And where did he get that
if
from?
If you let this 5-year-old boy decide to eat candy all day, he's going to do that.
Exactly.
Like, when did it become a good idea to let a 5-year-old, let a 6-year-old, let a 12-year-old make a life-changing decision for themselves?
Right.
When did that happen?
Right.
Like, I don't understand that. I don't get that.
And to medicate these young kids that are 5, 6, growing up and knowing that it affects their brain. It affects their organs. It makes them sick, but they're not allowed to do drugs. They're not allowed to do alcohol.
Right.
We can medicate them up.
He can't drive a car yet, but he can decide his sex.
Right. Oh, right. What sexual orientation, and he can cut off his pee-pee, and that, to me, that makes no sense whatsoever.
I don't know if this is true, but I heard a rumor that they either passed or are trying to pass a law in LA that states if your child comes to you and asks to do some of these things and you say no, they can take your kid from you.
Yeah, that's true. Just
basically, all he's saying is that he doesn't believe that kids should be making these choices. He uses the example of a 5-year-old, and if you had a 5-year-old and you let him eat candy, he would continuously eat candy over and over again, and because he doesn't know any better, he doesn't know what's right. So why would you indulge that bad behavior, that shouldn't be happening? We don't even let kids get tattoos, and that's something that could be removed by a laser. You're going to let kids make a decision on them mutilating their body and removing their reproductive organs? That's something that cannot be undone. And we won't let them even get a tattoo. And you want to let them remove body parts, healthy body parts? It's the absolute height of insanity. And this, again, I mentioned it earlier in the episode. If you try to pitch this script to Hollywood, they would reject it because it's out of this world and no one would ever believe it. Yet this is the world that we live in. So here is his actual response on Twitter It's not actually his response, it's his publicist's response, but what people believe to be his response initially. Neo's response is, after much reflection, I'd like to express my deepest apologies to anyone that I may have hurt with my comments on parenting and gender identity. I have always been an advocate of love and inclusivity for the LGBTQIA community, so I understand my comments could have been interpreted as an insensitive or offensive. Gender identity is nuanced, and I can honestly admit that I plan to better educate myself on the topic so I can approach future conversations with more empathy. At the end of the day, I lead with love and support everyone's freedom to express and pursue happiness. So, again, he comes out and on the podcast and says one thing, then he recants the statement on Twitter. However, this ends up being from his publicist. So he then goes back and puts out this video.
Right. Listen, I normally don't give too much of a damn about what y'all think about what I do, what y'all have to say about what I say, whatever. I normally don't care because, like I said, opinions ain't special. Everybody got one. However, this is something I feel very strongly on, and I need y'all to hear this from the horse's mouth, not the publicist's computer. So check this out. First and foremost, I do not apologize for having an opinion on this matter. I am a 43-year-old heterosexual man raising 5 boys and 2 girls, okay? That's my reality. Now, if my opinion offended somebody, yeah, sure, I apologize for you being offended because that wasn't my intention. My intention is never to offend anybody. However, I'm entitled to feel how I feel. I'm absolutely entitled to feel how I feel the same way you are entitled to feel how you feel. I ain't asked nobody to follow me. I ain't asked nobody to agree with me. I was asked a question and I answered the damn question, okay? Somebody asked my opinion on this matter and this is how I feel. I will never be okay with allowing a child to make a decision that detrimental to their life. I will never be okay with that. I don't care. I definitely plan to educate myself a little bit more on this matter. However, I doubt that there's any book anywhere or any opinion that somebody's going to tell me that's going to make me okay with letting a child make a decision like that. That's just period, point blank, and that's how I feel.
So good on Neo. I think he did absolutely the right thing. He recanted that bullshit apology that one of his publicists put out and said, this is how I actually feel, and stood by it. More people need to stand on their convictions. So good for him. I hope to see more people like him come out and say, hey, this is absolute nonsense. We should not be mutilating kids and forcing this gender identity crap on them. If they want to make the decision when they're older, that's fine. But we have to have a hard line in the sand, and it's at kids. We can't be doing hormone blockers, and we can't be doing gender reassignment surgery on minors. So one last thing before I sign off here today. There's been a lot of calls for Mitch McConnell to retire. Now, he's 81 years old. He's clearly lost his fastball. And recently, he had a moment where he stepped up to a podium and was supposed to be addressing the media. He froze. People are speculating as to what happened there. Did he have like a mini seizure, something along those lines? I don't know exactly what happened to him. Apparently, afterward, he was completely fine. I am all in favor of term limits, and I think these people like Mitch McConnell, Nancy Pelosi, and so on, they need to go. There should also be age limits as well. We have an age limit just to get into Congress. We should have an age limit to say, hey, this person, generally speaking, is probably too old to be making decisions for the rest of the country. However, specifically when it comes to McConnell, remember that there is a Democrat governor in the state of Kentucky currently. Now, luckily, the state of Kentucky has a law where the governor can replace the senator that either has to step down or is impeached or whatever, or dies, unfortunately. But they have to replace them from the same party, which is good. So you'd have to replace this person with a Republican. That would ultimately give that Republican, when they did the special election, an edge at getting re-election because they're already the incumbent. However, if you have a Democrat appointing a Republican candidate, I can't imagine that this guy would be anything other than a swamp monster. We don't want another 50 years or 40 years of Mitch McConnell from the state of Kentucky. So if Mitch can hold out, hopefully there's an election for the governor in the state of Kentucky in the fall. Hopefully a Republican can get in, and once that Republican's sworn in, then it would be time for Mitch to step down because he's clearly not right now. That's it for this episode of the Mayoral Podcast. Thank you all for tuning in. Please, again, make sure you hit the like button, subscribe, and share with friends and family if you like the content you've seen here today. And I will see you all in the next video.